Alright, we did the 16 by 19 a couple of weeks ago, and it seems like everyone was very interested in seeing an 18 by 20 video. So here it is. Today we're going to talk about the Wilson Blade 98 1820 V9. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So first of all, we reached a pretty big milestone on Wednesday, 10,000 subscribers. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much to each and every one of you. When I released our first video almost exactly a year ago, I did believe I could make some good content, but never once did I think we'd come this far this quickly. It's been a crazy roller coaster ride for me personally. I absolutely love my job, and it's thanks to all of you that I am where I am now. And beyond that, all of us at the store are so incredibly thankful for how much the Rackets and Runners community has grown. Onwards and upwards, we're going to do a little Q&A style of video next week to celebrate the 10K, so leave any questions you have for me in the comment section, and I'll answer as many as I can in that video. We're also entertaining the idea of doing a live video. I'll update you in the YouTube forum and our Instagram page if we do decide to go that way, but for now, just leave your questions down there. Now, I am really excited to talk about the Blade 1820 because in terms of my favorite racket lines of all time, you already know it's the Blade, but it's the 1820 that I've always gravitated to. Over the last several generations, though, I do think the 1619 has been a better overall racket, but there are a few changes here that make me think it is a lot closer, so hopefully I'll be able to clarify which one would work better for you. Now, of course, before we go on, let me remind you that any of the rackets we talk about here you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. Now, the 1820 has very similar specs to the 1619. It has a 98 square inch head size. It weighs 305 grams with a constant 21 millimeter beam. But yes, of course, it has an 18 by 20 string pattern, and the swing weight is a little higher than the previous one. It's gone up 5 points from 329 to 334 strum. I tested the flex on a couple of rackets, and it seems identical to the 1619, so 64 RA unstrung, which is a little stiffer than the previous one. So let's see how it compares and why it might be better for you than the 1619. So first things first, I want to explain why I think the last couple of 1820 blades have been noticeably worse rackets than the 1619s. Since the V7, Wilson has been adding these sort of clash-adjacent stabilization technologies aimed at making their blades more stable and playable at lower swing weights. The reason I had a real problem with this with the last couple of 1820s is that Wilson was basically ruining what makes an 18 by 20 so special by over-engineering the flex of those rackets. 1820s are made to kill any excess power, spin, or bounciness from a string bed so that you make the natural flex and feel of the racket the #1 outstanding feature when the ball is making contact. The stabilization technologies in the previous blades basically added something in there, mushiness, and that intruded on the graphite's natural flex, which took away from that pure connection. On the 1619s, that was fine enough because the technology really helped with stability and a bit with power and spin, so it did help make those rackets a little more well-rounded. But on the 1820s, because feel is the most important thing, it really hurt them. Now don't get me wrong, feel was already much better on the V8 than it was on the V7. They'd made a marked improvement, but they've just gone and refined that technology on the V9, which I found really improved the connection between me and the ball. There's just this more well-defined feel in and out of the sweet spot, and what that does is add this little extra crackle of feedback when you do make good contact, which is something I'd really been missing on the last couple of generations. It has a little more personality and communication with the player, which might sound insane, but it's something I really need when I'm playing with an 1820. Now, having that little extra bit of feedback gone on the last couple of 1820s made me think, okay, that's fine, just go for the 1619. It's probably a better overall racket anyways, but I'm really happy that it's back because that feedback is the most important ingredient in optimizing the 1820's control. The reason an 1820 is generally considered better for control than a 1619, again, comes down to what I was saying about how that denser string pattern basically tones down any extra playability you get from the string bed. When you've got less space between the strings, there's a lower launch, less potential for a wild response, and less trampoline effect. It's basically neutralizing the string bed in order to give the most dead, controlled, and consistent feel. All of that is absolutely here on the 1820 compared to the 1619, so when you take a big swing, you feel like you can grab and guide the ball while it's in the string bed. With the 1619, you still benefit from that good feel, but you generally want to hit with spin to control its launch. Here you can really hit with any style, even more penetrative shots that don't brush up on the ball as much. Now let's talk about stability, because Stable Smart, 45 braid, and now Stable Flex, all these Wilson technologies are designed to make a racket more stable without actually having to make it heavier. They basically use a more adaptable graphite layup so that if you do make contact outside the sweet spot, the racket is less punishing. In other words, it's more stable. It's not actually more stable though. That's why I keep calling these artificial stabilization technologies, because only weight can make something actually more stable. It's pretty clear that Wilson knew this tech wasn't as effective in their 1820s because they never dared to lower the swing weights nearly as much as on their 1619s. It's because the density of this string pattern basically cancels out whatever more forgiving feel you get from that layup, so they kept the swing weight high. It's the same thing with the V9. They even raised it a little bit, which I'm fine with because it's even more stable now. Now, it is worth noting that the blade has a pretty low stock static weight compared to other thin beam 98s, and especially compared to other thin beam 98 1820s. I do think it's stable enough to be played in stock form, but I've always said the blade gets better with 10 grams in the handle, and that's even more true with the 1820. It gets more solid and consistent, and it balances out that hefty swing weight, so if you can handle a 315 gram racket, which you should really be able to do if you're looking at an 1820 blade, I would highly recommend a leather grip. Again, yes, there is a leather grip here. Actually, no, there isn't. This is an L2, so there's a heat shrink wrap under here to make it an L3, which adds about 15 grams, but 10 should be enough. Now, there's a reason the 1619 is and probably always will be more popular than the 1820. Consistency and flat directional control are great, but they're just not as important for the modern game as spin and power. Nowadays, you have to hit with spin and power to compete, and there's no denying that the 1619 amplifies those two characteristics much more than the 1820. You can't have it both ways. Like I said, the whole point of an 1820 is to take away from as much of engineered playability as possible in order to have the best connection to the ball and therefore control. You're not going to get as much string snapback here, which means less spin potential, and the string bed won't push the ball as hard, but you absolutely still can hit with power and spin here, especially if that extra consistency gives you more confidence. That, again, is kind of the idea behind an 1820. You're the person in control, you determine the amount of power and spin, the racket is as blank a canvas as possible. If you're able to take a bigger cut of the ball because it's more consistent, then maybe you actually can hit with more power and spin, despite what might technically give you more. That's why I tend to gravitate to 1820s. I'm able to hit out more freely with an 1820, even compared to a good controlled 1619, so when I'm on top of my game, I can actually hit with more power and spin with these. Still, in a vacuum, with the exact same technique, swung at the exact same speed, you will produce more power and spin with the 1619. That is a physical fact, so if you feel just as confident with that racket, you should go for it. I also do just want to say, the Blade 1820 V9 is not a prestige, it's not a 90 or even a 95. It has less spin than the 1619, but this isn't a totally rudimentary racket either. It's actually decently spin friendly for an 1820, and the blade shape has more power than what you'd expect from something thin with a small head size, so we're not talking about a racket that's decades behind the industry curve. Also, the higher swing weight might make it a little more difficult to use, but it also means that players who are able to swing it fast will crush the ball a little harder. Now, compared to the previous 1820, the crisper and better overall feel also leads to a little bit more inherent power and spin. It's really not a huge difference, but that mushy feel led to a slightly more bleh response when the ball left the racket. Here you feel it snap out of the string bed with just a little bit more energy. I've kind of alluded to it throughout this whole review, but the whole reason you pick an 1820 blade over the 1619 is if you prefer to optimize the feedback and control of your frame at everything else's expense. The reality is, the 1820 is less powerful, it's less spin friendly, it's less forgiving, which is why for so many people it won't be the right racket, but the 1820 is a true traditional control racket, whereas the 1619 is definitely more of a modern control racket. So if that's what you're after, in Wilson's lineup, there really is no better option. Even compared to the Pro Staff, the Blade 1820 has a little more of that traditional guidey style of control. There is one thing I want to make clear though. The 1820 and 1619s are not totally different rackets. The differences I'm outlining are very subtle. In fact, if you look at these string bed densities, I'm sorry, I only have the V8 1619, it's not like there's a huge difference, but subtle is the area we're operating in with these reviews, and the differences are there if you're looking for them. Also, I saw your comments about straightening my strings. In my defense, this is just the way they notch. I can't really straighten them after they notch, but don't worry, I straighten my strings after I string them. I have to say, I really enjoyed playtesting this racket because I'd kind of given up on the 1820 blade. I actually thought Wilson was going to move away from it sooner rather than later, just because of how much better the 1619 complemented their stabilization technology. I still can't say it's totally traditional, but that tech does seem to be getting better and better in terms of feel, and that's really important on this style of racket, and I'm really happy about it. I think I can say the Blade 1820 is back. I really shouldn't switch rackets again, but I am considering it. I'll update you all on that in the future, but for now, that is going to be the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you do want to demo the Blade, you can come visit us in store, or you can check it out online at racketsandrunners.ca.